The Bible is so full of inconsistencies and contradictions, you simply cannot trust it. Have you heard this before?
Yes.
Today we are looking over 2 Samuel 24, 1 Chronicles 21 and 22, and then Psalm 30. And it may be one of the better examples that people use as biblical contradictions, trying to make the case that because the Bible even contradicts itself, you just simply can't trust it.
Well, we started out our readings today. Ryan was reading from 2 Samuel.
2 Samuel 24.
I keep getting these all mixed up. And then I read some of 1 Chronicles. So because we're reading this in a chronological way, some of these stories repeat themselves. But what was interesting about today's was that when Ryan had read it, we were talking about David and how, again, he's just kind of falling off the straight and narrow a little bit and kind of starting to do his own thing. So he decides to take it would be like a census, right?
It's a census.
Of the nation of Israel. But the reason that he does it is because in Ryan's passage, it said that he did this because God's anger kindled towards David. So what did it say? He handed him over. Do you remember what that said on your passage?
It says the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David against them.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So that's what Ryan's passage said. And then when I read my passage, it referred to Satan actually being the one who was tempting David to do this. Very much but I don't know, it seemed to me to sound a lot like Job. Like Satan is sent on behalf of God to tempt him, and I guess not even just tempt him. It was more to see how far he could go before Job would break. But that is the interesting thing. So we've got these two opposing stories of the same exact event with different people. And causing David to stumble.
It's not just any old contradiction either. Like 2 Samuel says God did it, and 1 Chronicles says Satan did it. That's kind of a big deal. It's not like, the names basically mean the same thing in Hebrew. No, these are like God or Satan.
It's not like there really is no wiggle room either for maybe they meant this.
Right.
Nope, that's pretty confusing.
So, I think probably the best way to take a stab at explaining this is the end of Genesis. I think it's chapter 50. Talks about how what you intended for evil, the Lord meant for good. This is Joseph addressing his brothers, saying that when you sold me into slavery, you were doing evil, but God meant to do good. Had Joseph's brothers never sold him into slavery, the nation of Israel would never have been preserved, because Joseph would not have ended up in Egypt to be able to provide food for his family to preserve Israel. So God in Genesis, throughout Genesis, but specifically in Genesis 50, is seen as allowing wicked people to do wicked things because we have a choice sometimes. He's allowing wicked people to do wicked things to preserve his ultimate plan that is very far from wicked. It's ultimately a righteous, good, holy plan. And so that is what's happening here in 2 Samuel 24 and 1 Chronicles 21. God is allowing David's own prideful, sinful heart to mislead him because of his own sin. We've seen that before. To ultimately provide a place to build the temple so that he can be worshipped. The Temple Mount is still the Temple Mount today. You can go visit it. It doesn't look the same. But that site was bought and is preserved until this day. So God is allowing David to be sinful at David's own accord and own account, so that he can provide a purpose and a plan for his people. It's just like Genesis 50. It's very similar. So did God do it or did Satan do it? Ultimately, God is sovereign, and God is overseeing what is allowed to happen, and Satan is just like a chump, actually. He's not allowed to do anything.
I was going to say, are you going to refer to him as that again? That was pretty funny earlier.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we have this story kind of unfolding, and I think it's refreshing. I really appreciate the narratives.
The story about the massive pestilence that kills thousands of people is refreshing.
Not that. The fact that we are actually back into more of this narrative story. I like to see the things unfolding naturally. Whereas when we get stuck in those Psalms, sometimes it's like, it's a little much. But Something that I really appreciated today was just seeing again the torch being passed along, as David is kind of like, he's not totally handing it off yet because he doesn't totally have like the full confidence in Solomon, but he is telling him like, hey, I've shed too much blood, like there's way too much blood on my hands for me to do this, but I want you to be the one that is like getting this temple prepared and ready to go.
And he's repeating what God had already told him.
Right.
You're not allowed to do it. Your son's going to do it.
But isn't that funny? That's like his kind of stamp of you're not allowed. Moses' stamp was you're not allowed to go to the promised land.
Yeah.
And like just such crazy things.
It's interesting that David has shed so much blood and been a part of so much war that God says, hey, your hands can't build my house.
But it's interesting too because his hands were also like doing what the Lord said, so that's kind of a tension.
Not all the time. Remember,
Majority.
he murdered Uriah the Hittite.
Yes, that's true.
He sought to kill Nabal, Abigail's husband. Was that his name?
Such a weird name.
He's done a lot of not great things.
Right.
So also, just to tie up some of these inconsistencies, there are three major ones here. The first one is the God versus Satan situation. The second one, if you're paying attention to the numbers of the census, 2 Samuel gives a number, I believe it is like 1.3 million. And 1 Chronicles gives a number that is, it's like
1.1.
Yeah, but that plus Judah. So it's like 1.57. They're not the same. And it is what a lot of people say is 2 Samuel is much more of an approximation, and 1 Chronicles is much more of an exact, closer number.
Well, and they even said in the Second Chronicle or First Chronicles reading that Joab didn't even like bother to count some of them because he was just like so angered by it.
Joab was furious about this. This, I think, another example.
It's such a silly thing. So, like, what's the point of counting them again?
So the issue at hand, there's two issues with the census. One is that they were not supposed to do that. They were supposed to have faith that the Lord would provide. That's why Joab says right away, will God not give us the men that we need? Like what he's saying is, David, we're not supposed to do this. We're supposed to trust that the Lord will provide. And so the issue seems to be that David is in a place of pride and ambition. And also, they don't collect the poll tax that is required by Exodus chapter 30. So if they're going to count the people, they have to collect a tax to do so. And they don't do that either. It's just a commandment.
That seems silly.
So they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And so the second contradiction is these numbers, and that can be easily explained by approximations. Like even at home, when you talk about the amount of money in your bank account, if you're a husband and a wife, you might say a different number, but you mean the same thing. You know, it's like we literally have $12 in our checking account. It's like, well, no, actually we have $13.15. But
peek into our lives.
Yeah. And then the final contradiction is the price of the ultimately the Temple Mount. If you're not aware of what's going on, David ends up buying this location, this threshing floor, this plot of land that is the site for the temple. And 2 Samuel says he pays 50 shekels of silver for the threshing floor and the oxen. And 1 Chronicles says he pays 600 shekels of gold by weight for the site.
Quite a difference.
It's quite a difference. One, the material is silver, then it's gold.
And it's not even like opposite where it's like, oh, it's like 30 pieces of gold. That could be the equivalent of this. No, it's actually the opposite where there's so much more gold.
So the way to reconcile this is that in 2 Samuel, David is paying for the oxen and for the threshing floor, like the immediate small site. In 1 Chronicles, I shouldn't use the word site, because 1 Chronicles uses the word site. It's the entire location. So the first account is this small spot, and the second account is this giant temple mount. So it makes sense that he pays 50 shekels of silver for the oxen and where the wheat was threshed.
And it is huge.
It's huge, yes. And so it makes sense that the price is much higher. And so, once again, these contradictions do not discredit the Bible. They just show that when you recount something, you have different points of perspective.
Well, you kind of see that too, even in the New Testament when you're talking about the different Gospels and the the accounts as they were written down according to those different individuals. So
my favorite way to illustrate this, and I do this with students all the time, is that if you have 5 people in a room and you ask all 5 people what the room looks like, almost certainly they will all say something different. And so I go around the table and say, hey, you describe the room. You describe the room. They all say something different. And then I say, who lied? Well, nobody lied. They all were describing the exact same room. It's just when you have 5 different perspectives, you have 5 different accounts.
right.
And so here we're getting different accounts of the same story. It doesn't mean that they're contradictory and can't be believed. Also, it seems kind of ridiculous to try to prove a contradiction in one chapter of one book to say that all 66 are unreliable and therefore the theology of God is unreliable. It's crazy. So I guess this is a Bible nerd sidetrack, but I do enjoy pointing out these things. So as far as a year apart from today, outside of the extra credit Bible nerdery, is that a word? Nerdery? I think a great angle on this story is David's sin was pride and ambition. And because he had this unrelented pride that is obvious when you read into the story, a lot of people suffered. And so, again, this is this idea of community over individual. So when the king sins, it affects the people. But his unchecked pride is what leads to this issue. And even his wise commander, Joab's like literally usually the guy that's saying, hey, David, cool it, man. This is not a great idea. Even when he gets a gut check from his commander, he just pushes forward anyway. Yeah. And so David's unchecked pride was incredibly dangerous to his people. And you know what? I think that is applicable to us today, where I see that the most. So I'm a youth pastor. I see that a lot in families. And so that's actually kind of my takeaway for today. Like, if you're in a place of, significant pride or ambition, it affects more than just you. It affects the people around you. And it does actually have, sometimes deep-seated consequences. The results of your unchecked pride and ambition. So I think it is good to have wise counselors. David should have listened to Joab. If there are people in your life that are good at keeping you in check, you should listen to them. But ultimately, we should pursue humility before God. And one of the ways we pursue humility is by trusting that God will provide, that God will make a way, and we can be still and know that he is God and trust in him. So just an encouragement to you. Pray to the Lord, be still and know that he is God, and keep your pride in check. You are not in control. God is. So we'll be back again tomorrow. See you then.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplанyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.